Let's freaking go. It's college football live, baby, on Power Hour SEC. Obviously, we're going to chat everything college football, but more of a focus on the Southeastern Conference. I appreciate all the love you guys have been giving to the channel lately. And the truth is, one of the best things you can do as a college football fan, especially if you're trying to bet on these games, is really start looking at the line earlier in the week. So I am not the best college football bettor. I am not. But I do well. I really do. I've had a really good string of success lately. And obviously, last week we gave you a pretty good play of Arkansas covering the plus 17.5. We also told you Florida would beat Tennessee outright, and so on and so on and so on. And one of the best things you can do to really get a grasp on all the college football matchups is taking a very early look at them instead of just trying to rush at the end of the week on Friday to decide, hey, this is a game that I want. Or Saturday morning when you're watching game day, you pull up the Score app, you pull up the Action Network, you pull up whatever, and you're like, oh my goodness, I have got to wager some money. And then at that point, you're just kind of rolling the dice. And all of it is a roll of the dice. So I've been getting a lot of questions, more so my LSU channel, but also here. What are some of the best ways to actually play basically anything when it comes to sports betting? So we'll talk about that tonight, but obviously the title of this video, South Carolina going up against Tennessee in a revenge spot from last year. Obviously, for me, I look at this from so many different angles. I think for me, and look, it could just be me here. I really do love South Carolina in this spot, and I know they're going to Knoxville, but if Joe Milton is the quarterback of the Tennessee Vols, I just do not trust them to cover pretty much any double-digit spread. Now, I will tell you this as well. If I were to start a SEC program right now, okay, and I needed a coach to get me over the hump, if I needed a coach who can make a huge difference in my program, even if I don't have a fertile recruiting base, even if I'm not the absolute biggest brand in college football, the two coaches in this matchup might be the two picks I would go with if I am building a program from scratch. I like Josh Heupel, and I love Shane Beamer. I love what they've done to both of their college football teams. And I understand in college football, we're not supposed to congratulate you if you lose a close game. But for me, there is no team in all of college football that has looked more impressive in their losses, that have multiple losses in South Carolina, losing in kind of a weird game versus North Carolina to start the season, and obviously losing versus Georgia. Now, why do I like South Carolina in this matchup? It's because of Joe Milton. I just don't believe Joe Milton in any situation. And I know a lot of people just do not believe in South Carolina's defense at all. Clayton White has not done a great job with this unit, but then again, he doesn't have the most talent to work with in the world either. So right now in the chat, if you're watching this down the road, type S for South Carolina, type T for Tennessee. Let me know who you believe will win this matchup. Okay. AP wants to talk some LSU versus Ole Miss. We can happily do that. As of now, I do like LSU in this spot. I do. I understand that the sharp money has already gotten this down to 3 to 2.5. And I do love looking at Parker Stats Award, his previews for every week. And he does have South Carolina. I say South Carolina. He does have Ole Miss in his predictive model beating LSU. So obviously, still very early in the week. But as of right now, I do think LSU not only wins, but they cover. And this obviously is a pretty huge over-under set at 67.5. I will say this. I know that this sounds very strange when you look at this matchup, but Brian Kelly's LSU offense is way better in my mind than Ole Miss's offense. And ironically, Ole Miss's defense is better than LSU's defense in this matchup. Normally, when these two teams play, it's the opposite. And that goes way before Lane Kiffin and Brian Kelly. So, obviously, a very interesting way of looking at that matchup there. Now, for me, one of my favorite things about this weekend's games is it's all SEC matchups. There's no out-of-conference matchups. There's no FCS matchups, FBS matchups versus teams out of conference. This is an all SEC slate of games. So, yes, AP's going with South Carolina. Skipper's going with Tennessee. And Spencer Rattler, he's the thumbnail of this video today, has been absolutely tearing it up lately. So, yeah, obviously really impressive stuff all around from Spencer. Now, taking a look at a couple of these other games here. Florida versus Kentucky with the Gators as a 2.5-point underdog. It is interesting when you look at a game like this with the 44.5-point total and they go all the way down here and you have a 67.5-point total. Absolutely crazy. A 23-point difference between the two of them. That is essentially 4 possessions. For me, normally you would like Kentucky in this matchup, or excuse me, you normally like Florida in this matchup because they're historically, obviously, the better program. But Kentucky's always been kind of a tricky place to play. This game is always kind of ugly. Normally, it is a defensive or special teams play that is the difference in this matchup. I'll tell you this. I do like Billy Napier in a big spot better than I like Mark Stoops in a big spot. And I understand on this channel, we have absolutely railroaded Mark Stoops on this channel. But, for me, there is a piece of me that kind of wants to go with the Gators here simply because I feel Billy Napier can win a big game more than Mark Stoops can win a big game. Obviously, Florida's got 2 of the top 10 explosive running backs in the SEC, maybe 2 of the top 5 explosive running backs in the SEC with Montrell Johnson and Etienne. I also like Cameron Jackson out of Louisiana, who's been a really good player for Florida in the middle of that defensive line. I am leaning Florida here. I am, and I'm getting 2.5 in what could be a very ugly game here with both of these offenses not looking the absolute best up to this point. Obviously, on the Thursday night live stream, we'll go a little bit deeper on Arkansas versus Texas A&M. Arkansas right now getting 6.5. Don't be confused by this. Arkansas, the designated home team. This game, of course, is a neutral sider played in Dallas every year in Jerry's world. Take a look at a couple of these other games. Auburn, 14.5 versus Auburn. Missouri, 13.5 versus Vanderbilt. Very interesting stuff. And then, of course, the final one here, Alabama, you got to swallow 14.5 on the road versus Mississippi State. I really do love the Tide in this spot. Mississippi State's absolutely terrible. I know that they look like they took a step forward in that thriller versus South Carolina. But look, Alabama historically, on the road, at home, it doesn't matter. They normally crush Mississippi State. It's normally not even close. And this honestly has been the worst SEC matchup that we have had in the SEC West out of any two teams. It's been the most lopsided in Alabama's favor. So none of the games have been compelling. I understand that the teams are totally different and the quarterbacks are totally different. I am leaning towards Alabama just absolutely slaughtering them. And then here at the end of these games, let's go Georgia, Auburn, 14.5 point spread here. Obviously, Auburn's offense has been very anemic. My play here is the under. I really do think this game will be like a 27-10 type of game where Georgia is able to win. And then, of course, Missouri going on the road here to Vanderbilt, 13.5-point spread with the total at 54.5. I actually really do love Vanderbilt in this spot, with Missouri in a big look ahead spot versus LSU the next week. So there you go. Now, let me know what you guys think about each and every one of these games. And yeah, I kind of want to get into the rest of the top 25 this weekend. You have Utah and Oregon State. And I get into some of these other games here. USC versus Colorado. USC swallowing 21.5 in the spot. I really do like Colorado on a bounce back. I do not trust USC's defense to stop Colorado's offense the same way Oregon did so last week. Kansas 16.5-point underdogs versus Texas with a 64.5 total. Duke, Notre Dame, kind of like Duke in that spot. The Riley Leonard show. So, yeah, that's what it looks like in the rest of college football up to this point. So, there you go. Now, normally these Tuesday live streams are a little bit more brief, but if there is any college football topic that you want to talk about, let me know right TF now. Okay? Connor says South Carolina, he's leaning there. AP thinks Kansas hangs with Texas. Ooh, that's spicy. Kansas hanging with Texas. I agree with you. 16.5-point spread seems pretty big. And obviously, Kansas a few years ago beat this Texas team. So why not? Jayhawks wins outright. I do think it's going to be a really good game, though. I hope so. I would do anything for Kansas to beat Texas again. But obviously, there are some pretty big stories in the Big 12 right now, one of which is Dave Aranda struggling right now at Baylor. You lose to Texas State, and now you get absolutely wiped off the field with Florida. Let's go to Connor here. Why are people treating Bama like the performance against Ole Miss was dominant? Well, they did win by 2 possessions. It wasn't dominant per se. I do think, though, Connor, the feeling from that game was it was going to be a better game. For years now, we have seen Lane Kiffin talk up this Bama game. And for years now, he has struggled in Tuscaloosa to make it competitive. 2 years ago, he got blown out. Last year, obviously, it was a very competitive game. I think some things worked against Ole Miss in that spot. And then, obviously, you take a look at what was a situation this year where you felt at the very least Ole Miss would move the football a lot. You would expect more than 10 points. I'll tell you this. Where Ole Miss is really, really struggling is on the offensive line. Bama's defense is really good. They just are. I understand that was not the case versus Texas. I get that. But that could just be a situation where Steve Sarkisian, who worked with Nick Saban for a few years, just has his number. I just think this Bama defense at this point is the best defense in the SEC. It's down between Bama and Georgia. But kind of what's very interesting about the SEC this year is once again with the transfer portal, everyone is kind of good. I mean, there's just not a whole lot of just bad in the SEC, I feel, outside of Mississippi State and arguably Vanderbilt. I just don't think anybody out there just sucks. I truly do believe, though, with Jalen Milroe, Bama has a chance to, at least go 10-2, 9-3. It's clear Milroe is their best option, and it doesn't take much. This Bama defense is still dominant. Whether you think Tavares Robinson or Kevin Steele is calling the shots or Nick Saban calling the shots, they're really good. They're really good yet again. So there you go. Now, next thing. There's been a lot of discussion here regarding what this college football weekend is going to look like compared to this last weekend. Because this last weekend, you had a lot of juiced up matchups. But the one thing that I've learned in the college football world is a lot of the times the weekends that people hype up end up sucking. There's so much hype surrounding that surrounding that Colorado versus Oregon game when every sign pointed to that one being a blowout. And then you had, obviously, this Alabama-Ole Miss game. It was just a tough game to watch. It was not a fun game at all. And then at the end, you had this Ohio State-Notre Dame game. Also kind of a brutal watch with a very thrilling ending. So, yeah, it's crazy. Whereas this weekend, there's not a whole lot of these marquee matchups, and I feel like we're going to get a bunch of legendary games. I do. I feel like this weekend is going to be very juicy. I don't know why. It just seems like my soul is relaying that information to whoever may be watching this. So, let us sink it. I like how Connor says, I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. As if there is another Baton Rouge. I would get it, Connor, if you were saying, well, I am from Springfield. Well, which one? Which one? But there you go. Now, I wanted to get back to this. When it comes to the world of sports betting, I get a lot of questions about this. Okay. And once again, I have had a very good year. I have. I'm always very upfront. But then again, just because you know about the sport doesn't mean you're good at betting it. Okay. You've got to really understand that you are going to lose. You cannot fear losing. You must also set aside a bankroll. Don't bet over your means. I understand it feels tantalizing and might feel like you are on top of the world, but I'll tell you this. I know people say don't bet on your own teams, but sometimes if the number is where you like it, then you kind of sort of have to. For me, I felt really good about Arkansas keeping that game close last week. I really did. I looked at a bunch of different projections. I looked at the history of the matchup. I looked at a lot of different things that led me to believe that Arkansas was going to play a competitive game versus LSU, and they did. They did. So, I went a few units in on that one. But for each and every week, there's not going to be a matchup that you might like that much. So don't feel like your sizing has to be big on every play that you make. Understand that even though over-under seem tantalizing, they're tough. They're really, really, really tough. Okay. And one of the toughest things to do is obviously believing in yourself. having confidence. Okay? You have to have belief in yourself. Okay? Now, don't forget. Sign up now with our friends at Underdog Fantasy. UnderdogFantasy.com. So many different games that they have here. Over, unders, higher, lowers. UnderdogFantasy.com. Okay? So you get over here to the far left, you get all these sports. You can go to college football. And guess what? You've got all these games you could pick higher lowers, okay? This is just the early slate. There will be more games added throughout the week, okay? So if you think Luke Altmaier, who's not that good, is going to throw under 214 passing yards, you pick lower. And guess what? You can do this for a lot of different teams. UnderdogFantasy.com, promo code Carter if you want to support Power Hour SEC, okay? And there you go, right there. Underdog Fantasy. UnderdogFantasy.com. Promo code Carter. There you go. Now, that'll do it for me. I do want you to know, as of now, I'm liking South Carolina to cover versus Tennessee. As of now. And I'm still standing by that Nico is the better quarterback for Tennessee than Joe Milton. Still standing by it. You got to stick with your takes, baby. It is Power Hour SEC. Boom! And tonight we are doing stir fry night 2. Let's go.